I'll start with a quick review for this book, Out of Your Mind by Alan Watts. I'll give this book 4 out of 5. Always interesting to listen to his ideas. I'm not fully agree with all of what he says. He has some leaps he makes that I'm not fully agree with, but it's always interesting. He's a great talker. This is recordings from his audio archives. This is lectures he was lecturing back in the days. Definitely interesting, very entertaining, and always you learn. It's not necessarily about his main premise. Always, it's sometimes those little things he has to say because he had quite broad knowledge about many different things. So that's what I enjoy more could be than his main premises. But he's great, and one thing I understood right before finishing this book, what's so great about him, is that he has great metaphors and analogies. One of the best ones I encountered, and this is always good. I always look for analogies and good metaphors because this is really help us to understand things better and remember them better. So he is great at this, and he's great about telling stories and making connection between different things. So definitely recommend, even if you're not into Zen or in any other of that. It's just interesting. I'm not that much into those parts, but again, those other ideas, and just it's an interesting perspective to entertain. Now let's see the notes. The philosopher needs another person to complete their own thoughts. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Both sides are getting something out of it because without someone to talk to, the philosopher would not complete their thoughts. They don't. You have to have that interaction, that back and forth, in order to. Sorry about that. In order to complete their thoughts. The stomach evolved to feed the brain or the other way around. It's a symbiotic relationship. One implies the other. He brings some interesting question there. Is what evolves to feed what? The brain evolves to feed the stomach because that helps. If you have better brain, you're gonna feed it. You feed it, or the stomach evolved to feed the brain. It's kind of the chicken and the egg situation. I didn't really like his answer because I think it's an interesting question. What comes first? But he says that it's a symbiotic relationship. One implies the other. Not super satisfying answer. And generally speaking, some of his answers are not very satisfying, but it's an answer. Words are too clumsy to explain complex processes. This is one of his main, one of the ideas that I like. He says that we try to put things into boxes with words and laws, but many things it doesn't work that way because specifically for words they're too clumsy to explain complex things. To know that we know has pros and cons. It's good for better processing, but it's also associated with worrying. Know that we know, it's not always good. One thing is good, we can process better because we have kind of a compiler. That's the way I look at it. It's a good metaphor. We have something to know if we're being logic and all that. But the other thing is, it's associated with worrying because we know we're worrying and we can worry more about more things. Hide and seek is the game of games, the ultimate game. He treats this game as the game of the universe. Hide and seek. Side note, some of the inferences made are great leaps. That's one of the things that bothers me about him, and that's why maybe he hasn't got a 5. One of the reasons this book doesn't get a 5 is because some of the inferences are kind of like, I don't have a particular example, but he makes a lot of leaps, and some of them are kind of like, I don't know if that works. According to the author, the universe is all one, and it's us. We shine the sun. One of those questionable ideas that the universe is all one and we shine the sun. He says like without us the sun would not shine, which is kind of like, yeah, maybe we would not perceive it as shining, but that thing would still be there and you would emit radiation and all of that. I'm not sure what he means by it. When we breathe uncontrollably, is that involuntary? One of the question he brings. I think one of his education was philosophy, so it makes sense, and I like those questions. When we breathe uncontrollably, is that involuntary, or it's not voluntary, obviously, because it's not controllable, but is that involuntary? We have no control over it whatsoever? Interesting question. Conscious attention is a trouble seeker, just like a radar. That's a conscious attention. Other people call it a compiler. It's looking for trouble. And that's what we get. Many times we get trouble. You can desire not to desire because this is a desire. I like this. If you desire not to desire, that's a desire. And that's one of the things he says. You can desire not to desire. That's his answer to that. And what I say is, yeah, so how do you desire not to desire then? He's kind of like, it's kind of supposed to happen by itself. And that's not an answer. We only detect some patterns while leaving many others out. We only see some things, but we don't see most others. It's hard to contrive art. Art often comes to you, and it's hard. Some people are better and worse at this, but it's hard to contrive it. The intervals between things, or the off mode, is not less important than the on mode. He calls it space. The space between things is not less important than the things itself. Like in the intervals between music, for example, is not less important than the notes themselves. Interesting. One object in space could not be determined if it moves. If there are two, we can know they're moving in relationship, but not who moves. When there are three, we can better determine due to the majority. So we don't know who moves if there is one. We don't know if it moves at all. When there is two things, we know that one moves, but we don't know who moves. But when there's three things, we know who moves from who. And the only reason we know who moves from who is because of the majority. If one gets out of the two, we say the other thing moves away. But this is only because it's just the majority. It could be that the two moves out from the one. Again, some of those little things that are interesting. The onion is deceptive since it's all skin and no center. There is no center in there. It's just layers and layers, but there is nothing inside. And he makes a connection between that to something that I don't exactly remember, but this is not the important point. A good perspective on life is as a game, but a game of survival nonetheless. So we should look at it as a game, because that's a good perspective of life, but it is a game of survival because you might die. So it's a game nonetheless, but it's a game. We are rhythms that do rhythms. I like this idea. That we are rhythms, patterns in a way, or any other rhythm that do rhythms, because we create ripples and ripple effects. So we are rhythms that create rhythms. When we try to pull ourselves together, we often use physical strength as an attempt. This obviously only creates physical tension while interfering with that tension. That's how we're trying to focus on something. When we pull ourselves together, sometimes we literally use physical strength, physical muscles, but this is not helping because it could only interfere, especially if it's cognitive changes we seek. Physical strength has nothing to do with it. It could often has the opposite effect of interfering with our cognitive process. There is always one part that is hidden from ourselves since we split into two when looking, similar to the way the universe, or us, trying to understand what matter is. So what happens when you look for ourselves, there's always another part of, it's kind of a hidden part of it. So there is something, who is that something that's just said that? And it's kind of like a never-ending loop. Similar thing happens in the universe when we try to look for matter or particles. There's always something else under. We always ask, yeah, but what is that made of? And what is that made of? So similar things. When we understand we are not in control, only then we can live fully and let it go. That's when we understand we're not in control, then we can just let it go and live with the flow in a way. According to the author, pain is partially experienced because we object to it. Pain contradicts our self-image, so we fight it. One of those things that I don't fully agree with. Pain is partially experienced because we object to it, but if we just accept it, it would not be as much as it would not be there. Hard to comprehend or agree with. Pain contradicts our self-image, so we fight it. We don't like it, it says. But again, hard to agree with. Sexual pleasure is giving your whole self into it. That's what we enjoy, is we give our all into it. You're all inside. The future changes the past, just like us in a sentence or a melody. In that way, the future changes the past, because what you read, right, or what you're gonna read, gonna change what happens or what you just read a sentence ago or in the beginning of the sentence. Same thing with the melody. So the future has some effect of the past. He makes some leaps out of it that I don't fully agree with them. I don't remember them, but he made some leaps. In Zen, there is the idea of just doing it without overthinking it, just doing it and not trying to fight with it. Religions repeat mantras until they become meaningless. This enables treating them as pure noises that should be lived or experienced. This is one of the attempts of religions to be in the moment in a way, is to repeat things until they become meaningless and they just become noise, and that's where we can really be in the moment and relieve all the noise. Understanding that life is a sort of an illusion allows us to live it fully and immerse ourselves into it. It's a similar idea of, where was it? Only when we understand we don't have control. So it's a similar idea. Life is a sort of an illusion. Only then we can immerse ourselves into it and just let it go. Darkness is seeing something. Seeing nothing is like seeing behind our eyes. So it says like the void, even. So when we die, people say it's like seeing nothing. Not seeing nothing it's something. Seeing nothing is not. It's like seeing behind our eyes. That's a good metaphor he's using here. It's like what do you see behind your eyes? How your eyes seeing your brain. One of those is nothing, because there is nothing. You can't see behind your eyes. There is nothing there, and that's how it feels. It's a good metaphor. We should strive to act in a non-interference way with the world. So it's one of the ideas of Zen, kind of a non-interference. Don't try to work too hard to swim against the stream. According to the author, he is not trying to persuade you. He is simply being, just like the sky or clouds. He's not trying to persuade you, even though I think there is some persuasion there. But he says he's not trying to. It's just doing whatever he is doing. Just like the cloud is doing what he's doing, or they're doing. One don't really know their true self, just like one cannot smell their own noses. That's another good metaphor there. We cannot know our true self just because the nose cannot smell the nose. It's not one of those ironies or paradoxes. Having no feeling is called a stone Buddha. Instead, one should live with the flow of life. A stone Buddha is one that doesn't have a feeling, and that's one of the things that people get wrong about Buddhism and Zen, that you should have no feeling. That's a stone Buddha, and that's not the way to go. Instead, one should live with the flow of life. Just if you're happy, just be happy. If you're not, just don't object to it as hard. When thinking of our response, that goes against spontaneity. When we have to think of something, that is not spontaneous, and that goes in a way against the flow. He says it's not to say that you should not think, but that goes against. We have the illusion of control by repeating thoughts. That's how we have we keep a sense of control by repeating thoughts, even though we don't really have much control over what's going on inside. When overthinking about what we're thinking, we interrupt the flow. When a system gets too much feedback, it cannot function properly. So when we're thinking of what we're thinking about, when it happens too much, a little bit is good because it's help us understand things. But when it happens too much, it's like he brings this metaphor of the system getting too much feedback. It's just back and forth, and there is no progress made, and you cannot function properly because it's just kind of getting into a loop and blah 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 blah. It starts to get like this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until there is only noise. The mind is not like a paper. Thoughts cannot stick or last. We sometimes think of thoughts as permanent, but it's not permanent. They come and go, and it's not like paper. Trying to live life with predetermined rules is not feasible since life is chaotic. He brings this metaphor of putting squares around things, and it's like rules, but life is too chaotic to put it into a rule. Zen is understanding that we cannot get it better. You cannot game the game. That's one of the things Zen is trying to portray, is that you cannot game the game. You cannot get it better. That is, he calls it, this is nirvana already. One of those things that, I don't know about nirvana, but yeah, you cannot game the game. That's not a way you agree with. The only way to make a fool understand they are is by making them see their foolishness. They have to see that, and you have to show them that, and not telling that. Relativity means relatedness. The fact that we are all essentially one, just like we have many senses in which we don't see that connection. We have many things that we don't see that connection. That doesn't mean that there is no connection. And he says that relativity means relatedness. They are related, and it's all related. Because one is only big against something smaller. One is only hotter compared to something colder, and such. So we are all related in a way. We only pick up the vibration that are related to us. Only those ones we pick up. We don't see many other vibrations that goes around. The most fundamental game is hide and seek. Waves work in a similar way. One must be, so to disappear. That's why he says that this is one of the most important games in the universe, because it's kind of it says it's the intervals. It's the no. It's the off mode. So you have to have off to be something, to have something to on. If that makes sense. So that's the most fundamental game. After a long period of silence, one stops thinking in words. The senses take control. That happens after a long period of silence. Senses take control over than words. One must learn to be self-conscious, all while keeping a sense of its limitation. One can be spontaneous, all while being aware of it. So we have to learn to be self-conscious, but we have to know also that it has great limitations. We cannot be conscious all the time, and one can be spontaneous all while being aware of it. It's not necessarily a contradiction. We can be aware of being spontaneous. It's not a contradiction. Religion always tries to convince you there is something beyond what you are. Always trying to say that there is an afterlife, there is something you should strive for. And one of the ideas of Zen is that this is what you have right now. This is the great thing. Buddha is the awakened one. The main idea of it is to not try too hard to go against yourself. You cannot desire not to desire. The middle way is the key. Generally, so Buddha is the awakened one. That's just literally the translation. And the main idea is to not go too hard against yourself. Similar with what happens with desiring not to desire, because that's a desire. So how do you not desire not to desire? With not going too hard against yourself. The middle way is one of the main points there. You should strive to be not in extremes, more in the middle. The conscious mind is only aware of one or two things at a time out of many possibilities. We don't see many things, so it's very, very limited. University is a pattern since it changes rapidly. Humans are also patterns that change but look the same. So we all look the same, but we change. It's kind of like he brings the metaphor of water in the river. It's not the same water, but the river looks the same, and it's the same river, even though the water is always changing. Same thing with the university. Universities keep changing, different administrators, different students, but what it is, it's a pattern. Same things with humans. We are a pattern. Good, very good metaphor. Is the leaf of this year the same of the last year? Very, very, very interesting question to think about. Is it the same? Is it not the same? It came from the same tree, uses the same nutrients and everything, but is it the same? Space moves with whatever holds it, just like a hand that moves with both the space and molecules. So the space goes with it, everything. That's one of his points in this book here, that space is a part of it. The intervals are not less important than the notes, for example. And the space also goes with it. So we have our hands is moving, and it's made out of molecules and atoms, but there is great space in between them. But it all moves together, all of it, with the space and the molecules, all move together. Concepts is like trying to eat soup with a fork. That's not a great analogy or metaphor. Is when you have concepts, it's like trying, because it's putting a square around something. It's like trying to eat a soup with a fork. Nothing comes out. Side note, one of the great things about the author is the analogies and metaphor he entertains. That's what I said. I do like about him, great analogies. It's really remarkable. And the last one, when there's too much feedback in the system, it can cause anxiety. The mind gets into a loop. That's what happens when we think we're in control, for example, and we trying to get like around itself. There's a feedback loop, and that feedback loop prevents us from getting somewhere, but it also creates anxiety, because we constantly thinking, what are we thinking? What are we thinking? When we can't go too deep into it because we're not going to go anywhere. So that's for the notes. Again, very interesting. I would recommend. So 4 out of 5. Always some interesting ideas. Again, I don't necessarily agree with all of his ideas and some of the leaps, but definitely interesting book or something to listen to. Thank you.